Hello, my friend. My name is Anton from Connect.com, and this is the third video of our second season of Code Express series. In our previous video, we have taken a look how you could use the existing models which is coming as a part of the standard Python distribution, and these models in your script, and then that you could focus only on the logic that you want to implement. You don't need to do heavy work working with the files or working with any other details. And that's why you focus only on the logic. So for instance, we have used models such as regular expression, which allows you to match information in your strings using the regular expression or finding substrings. You can also use the model called CEX, which allows you to work with your network operating some systems, doing some configurations like executing your file or your script with some arguments and so on and so forth. Sometimes, or basically at some point in time, hopefully in the near, you will be able to create your own script, which is so good that you will be able, or you would like to reuse them in other your applications, or perhaps share with the community on the GitHub or any other media. So that is why the point is how you could create your models. And this is our model today, our blog is about. So back in the days, in our first season, in the session number 9, we have created the script using the while function, which allows you to provide the range of the IP addresses, and this range of IP addresses allows you is split into the variables, and all the IP addresses into all this range are printed, and you could work with them. Let's go to this folder. It is session number 9. If you'd like to take a look and understand how you create this function, please watch that video. And for now, we'll just execute it again using our Python. And you see that we get it printed into the CLI, all the IP addresses in the standard range. Basically, the standard range is defined by the variable. So now we would like to convert this code, first of all, in the user-defined function. This user-defined function would be put into a separate folder, into a separate Python file, and we will create our main file, which would import this user-defined function. This is the basics of the usable code. So let's start by creating the folder for our current session. Let's call it directory 13, and this is our third video out of the second season. We'll create the subfolder called bin. It's typically the folder, oh, I think I created not in the proper format, so typically the folder bin is where all the helpers are stored. So the helpers in this case mean the functions or files with classes, variables, or any other data which we would like to import in our main script. The main script is typically called main. So that's why let's create our file structure. The main script will be called main.py, and our supporting file would be first of all placed in the directory bin, and will be called IP converter.py. We have created our files. You see, we have them. Now, with these files, what we would need to do, we would need to create the user-defined function. So we go to our original file with our while.py with a function which is converting the string into a list of the IP addresses. And we then go to our IP converter file and insert this. The first thing first, we need to convert it into the user-defined function. So how we do this? We need to invent the name of our function. Let's call it IP lister. The input would be the name of the variable which we like to pass. So we already work internally with a variable called IP addresses. So in order not to rewrite it too significantly, we would copy this name. So let me call it here. We would copy the name of this so IP addresses, so that would be, so that it's the same name as we have internally. Now we would remove this variable that we have default from this function because we don't need to have it. And we need to remember that we need to indent all the content of user-defined function, but for spaces, it's very easy to do it in VS Code using the tab keyword. Now we have user-defined function. So the user-defined function yet, though, do not provide, as a result of the execution, anything. It just print into the CLI the lines with the IP addresses. What we want to do right now, we would create the list, let's call it result IPs, is an empty list. So inside this list, we will add the IP addresses instead of printing them to the CLI as we was doing previously. So we see that the keyword, the function where it was getting the IP address was inside the printing function. IP is, we have used the format string afterwards to print this IP address. So that's why we could understand that what is input to the format function, that is ultimately the string which contains the IP. So we would add a new line which would to our IP address range using the append function add the content of this IP address. So instead of printing it to the CLI, we will add the IP address to the list. So now we could remove this function as well. The last point would be to, after the function is complete, to return the result of the execution outside of the function. Using the return keyword, we would provide back the content of this result IP list. So this thing is done. What should we do in our main script then? So in our main script then, we would need, as usual, to start with the pass to the Python. So that is why we would copy the first string. Then, as we have shown you in our previous session, we, using the keyword models, we use, well, not the keyword models. So typically in the beginning of the file, we import the libraries or other things that we need in our file to be executed. We use the conversion of the syntax from name of the library and then import and what exactly we're importing. And what exactly could be any artifact, could be variable, could be user-defined function, could be object, and so on. So in this case, as we are importing the file from our folder, we need to provide pass name of the folder or subfolder dot name of the file without the PY extension, and then what we are importing. That is why we are typing bin IP converter. We tell what from this file we're going to import. In this file, we have a user-defined function which is called IP lister, right? And that's why we type we would like to import this IP lister. Exactly the same syntax as was used like from, import, match, or something like this. So that would allow us to use this function in our separate file. That's the basics of the reusable code. Now we would create their variables using the same approach. Let's say IP range. We provide their IP addresses, let's say 192.168.1.1 and then 192.168.1.10. This is the range we are going to pass as an input to our user-defined functions. And in the body, we will create IP list variable using the result of execution IP list function we have just created. And the input as an argument to the function, we provide IP range comment. Once this is done, we would like to print the content of this file using the print function, right? So now let's try to execute our file. So we need to convert it to executable one using the change mode function. So we have done this using change mode a plus x and then name of the file. And now we would like to execute our script. You see, we have in our CLI now list of the API addresses. You see that also in the bin folder we have a new subfolder generated called UI cache, which is created all the time, the first time when we import our function and use it in our main script. So that is basically it. This is the basics. Now we could start thinking how we could improve or extend the functionality of this code. Let's say I would like to provide the starting and ending API addresses as an argument to the script. As you might remember from our previous video, the video number 12, that we could import the module called SYS, which allows us to interact with the operating system where we run our Python. So out of this model, we could use the artifact called RGV, which is a list containing the arguments which we provide in the CLI upon executing of our script. By default, it contains one argument, so as it is a list, meaning it has an index 0, which is the name of the function itself. So using the spaces, we could provide other arguments. Let's say in the second argument, we should provide the starting IP addresses, and the third argument, we should provide with the ending IP addresses. If we provide less than 3 arguments in total, the default range should be used. So that's why in our body, we would use the if conditional, and using the len function, which allows us to get back the amount of the elements in our list, we would provide the input to this function sys.rgv. So if there is less than 3, we would then call the function with its default range, else, meaning if it is 3 and more, we'll take the second and the third arguments and then input to our function. So we would call here IP list, the function IP lister. Now we need to provide the string, so that's why we use a formatted string. The first would be the first argument, and the second would be the second argument. So, and that is why using the format, we would provide the sys RGV with the index 1, because index 0 is used by the name of the function which we are running, and by the name of the script itself, and sys.rgv 2. So let's try to run the script right now. If you run it without any arguments, we are getting the range with the default IP addresses. If we provide just one argument, we are getting it still with the default IP addresses. If we would provide, let's say, 2 arguments after the name of our function, now you see we are getting the list with the IP address using the starting and the ending we have provided in the CLI. So you have learned in this video how to create your own script into a separate file, using the find function, variables, whatever you'd like to import, and then how to import it in your separate script. So this is the basics, a set of the reusable coding and the basics of the scalable application, because having all your functions in a single file is just difficult if you have like hundreds of the lines of the code. So you have also like reckoned how to use the SIS model, sys model to work with the arguments and an input to your function, to your script you are creating. If you like this video, like it in your social media, repost it. If you'd like to learn more how Python could help you with network automation, and not only Python, come to our network automation training. We are starting just in 3 weeks. Still have time to subscribe, and you will learn a lot how you could use Python and Ansible and the Bash to improve your efficiency as a network engineer for network developing, automation, operation, how to use multiple protocols such as netconf or GNMI RESTconf to manage the devices, how to use Python for defensive coding where you're under network attacks, and so on and so on. Thank you very much for your attention and see you the next time. Take care, my friend. Goodbye.